The transport ship Meridian's Hope shuddered as it entered Earth's atmosphere, its hull groaning under the stress of re-entry. Inside the cramped passenger compartment, Zara Chen pressed her face against the small porthole, watching the blue marble of her homeworld grow larger. After 3 years of brutal interstellar warfare against the Vorthan Empire, she was finally coming home. At 19, Zara had seen more death and destruction than most beings experienced in multiple lifetimes. The neural implant behind her left ear still hummed softly, a constant reminder of the human military's combat enhancement program. She flexed her fingers, feeling the synthetic muscle fibers woven through her arms respond instantly to her thoughts. The modifications had saved her life countless times during the siege of Kepler Station, but now they felt like weights dragging her down. All surviving personnel, "Prepare for landing at New Geneva Spaceport," announced Captain Rodriguez over the intercom. His voice carried the same exhaustion that plagued every human who had fought in the war. "Medical teams are standing by for those requiring immediate attention." Zara touched the scar running from her temple to her jaw, a souvenir from when Vorthan plasma fire had nearly taken her head off during the Battle of Titan's Edge. The ship's medical bay had done what it could, but the mark remained, a permanent reminder of humanity's desperate fight for survival. The other passengers around her were fellow veterans, each bearing their own collection of scars, both visible and hidden. Sergeant Martinez sat across the aisle, his prosthetic arm occasionally twitching as its neural interface struggled with damaged pathways. Behind her, Lieutenant Park stared at nothing, his eyes reflecting the 1,000-yard stare that haunted too many soldiers. The landing was rough, the ship's damaged stabilizers unable to provide their usual smooth descent. Zara gripped her seat as they bounced twice on the tarmac before finally settling. Through the porthole, she could see crowds of people waiting behind security barriers holding signs and flowers. Families reuniting with their heroes, but Zara knew no one would be waiting for her. Her parents had died in the initial Vorthan assault on Luna Colony, vaporized along with 3 million other civilians when the enemy's planet crackers had torn the moon apart. She had volunteered for the enhanced soldier program the next day, driven by grief and rage that had sustained her through years of combat. The disembarkation process took hours. Medical checks, debriefings, psychological evaluations. Zara answered the questions mechanically, her enhanced reflexes keeping her body perfectly still while her mind wandered. The psychiatrist, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, seemed concerned about her responses. "Zara, you've been through tremendous trauma," Dr. Yamamoto said, reviewing her file on a holographic display. "The combat modifications you've received are extensive. Have you given any thought to what you want to do now?" "I need to finish school," Zara replied simply. "I was in my first year of university when the war started. I want to complete my education," Dr. Yamamoto frowned. "The integration program we discussed offers excellent vocational training. You could have a military career, or transition into private security. With your enhancements, you'd be incredibly valuable in those fields." "I want to study xenobiology," Zara said firmly. "I want to understand them. All of them. Not just how to kill them." The psychiatrist made several notes before nodding. "Very well. We'll arrange for your academic records to be updated and coordinate with Terra University. They have excellent facilities and a strong support program for veterans." 3 days later, Zara stood at the gates of Terra University, a massive complex of crystalline spires and floating platforms that housed nearly 2 million students from across human space. Her single duffel bag contained everything she owned, a few changes of clothes, her military decorations, and a small hollow locket containing the last images of her parents. The student housing assignment office was a chaos of young people, their voices creating a constant buzz of excitement and nervousness. Zara waited in line, acutely aware of how different she looked from the other students. While they chatted about summer vacations and social media feeds, she stood silent, her enhanced hearing picking up dozens of conversations simultaneously. "Room 847C, Dormitory Complex 7, the housing clerk announced, handing Zara a digital key. "You'll be sharing with 3 other students. Orientation begins tomorrow morning at 800 hours. Zara almost corrected the clerk's use of military time, then realized the woman had probably done that on purpose after seeing her veteran status in the system. The dormitory was newer than she expected, all gleaming surfaces and smart glass windows that automatically adjusted for optimal lighting. The elevator hummed quietly as it carried her to the 47th floor, its artificial gravity generators maintaining perfect stability. Her room was spacious, with 4 separate sleeping alcoves arranged around a common area. 2 of her roommates were already there, unpacking their belongings with the help of hovering anti-grav cases. "Oh my God, finally," squealed a petite blonde girl who couldn't have been more than 17. "I'm Madison, but everyone calls me Maddie. This is Priya." She gestured to a tall, dark-haired young woman who offered a more reserved smile. "Zara," she replied, setting down her duffel bag. "Is that all your stuff?" Priya asked, her accent carrying hints of the Mars colonies. "The moving company lost our shipment, but it should be here tomorrow." Zara nodded. "I don't have much." Maddie's eyes suddenly widened as she noticed the scar on Zara's face. "Oh wow, what happened? That looks intense." "Madison," Priya hissed, clearly embarrassed by her roommate's lack of tact. "It's fine," Zara said quietly. "I was in the war." The room fell silent. Both girls stared at her with expressions mixing awe, curiosity, and something that might have been fear. Zara realized that to them she wasn't just another student. She was something else entirely, something dangerous and unfamiliar in their safe civilian world. "The Vorthan War?" Maddie whispered. "But you're so young." "I volunteered when I was 16, Zara explained, moving toward her assigned alcove. Age restrictions were waived during the emergency conscription period. She began unpacking her few belongings, hyper-aware of how her roommates watched her every movement. Her enhanced reflexes made even simple tasks appear unnaturally precise and efficient. When she set down her military decorations on the small desk, Maddie gasped. "Is that a silver star? And a combat action ribbon?" Zara glanced at the medals. "Among others. What did you do to earn them?" Priya asked softly. For a moment, Zara considered telling them about holding the line at Kepler Station, when the Vorthan ground forces had broken through, about single-handedly destroying 3 enemy mechs with nothing but improvised explosives and her bare hands, about the 43 confirmed kills that had earned her the nickname Ghost among her unit. Instead, she simply said, "My job." The third roommate, Rebecca, arrived later that evening while Zara was reviewing the university's academic catalog on her personal tablet. Rebecca was older, probably 21, with the confident bearing of someone from one of the core worlds. "So you're the war hero," Rebecca said after the introductions, her tone carrying a subtle edge that Zara's enhanced senses immediately detected as hostility. "I'm just another student," Zara replied evenly. "Right," Rebecca smirked. "Just another student who probably has enough cybernetic modifications to bench press a hovercar." The tension in the room was palpable. Maddie fidgeted nervously while Priya tried to change the subject to their upcoming classes. But Zara simply returned to her tablet, her expression remaining neutral. She had survived 3 years of interstellar warfare, watched entire worlds burn, and lost everyone she had ever cared about. A roommate with an attitude problem was the least of her concerns. Tomorrow she would begin the next phase of her life, trading battlefields for lecture halls and plasma rifles for textbooks. What she didn't know was that surviving university would prove to be its own kind of war. The first day of classes began before dawn for Zara, not because she needed to, but because her military conditioning made sleeping past 5 in the morning nearly impossible. She moved through her morning routine with mechanical precision, performing the calisthenics and stretching exercises that kept her enhanced physiology functioning optimally. Her roommates were still asleep when she left for the dining hall, their civilian schedules allowing for the luxury of late mornings. The campus was eerily quiet at this hour, with only maintenance drones and a few dedicated athletes visible in the pre-dawn light. The dining hall was nearly empty, staffed by automated food dispensers and a single human supervisor who nodded politely at Zara as she selected her breakfast. Military rations had trained her to eat efficiently rather than for pleasure, so she chose items based purely on nutritional value. Protein bars, synthetic fruit, and a vitamin-enriched beverage that tasted like metal, but provided everything her modified metabolism required. "You're up early," said a voice behind her. Zara turned to see Professor Helena Cross, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and the kind of intense eyes that suggested a sharp intellect. According to the university directory, she taught advanced xenobiology and had published extensively on alien physiology during the war. "Old habits," Zara replied, gesturing to an empty table. Professor Cross, isn't it? I'm registered for your morning lecture. Ah, the veteran student. I read your application essay. Professor Cross sat down across from her, carrying a cup of something that smelled strongly of caffeine. You want to understand alien biology to promote peace rather than warfare. Admirable, if perhaps naive. Zara bristled slightly. With respect, Professor, I've had more direct experience with alien physiology than most researchers. Combat experience, yes. But combat teaches you how to destroy something efficiently, not how to understand it. Professor Cross leaned forward. Tell me, during your military service, did you ever attempt to communicate with a Vorthon soldier? The question caught Zara off guard. She thought back to the countless engagements, the faceless enemies behind energy shields and powered armor. They weren't interested in communication. They wanted to exterminate humanity, did they? Or were they following orders just like you were? Professor Cross took a sip of her drink. The Vorthon Empire spans 12 star systems and encompasses at least 6 distinct species. Their military caste represents perhaps 1% of their total population. Did you know that? Zara felt a familiar anger building in her chest, the same rage that had driven her through years of combat. I know they killed my parents and 3 million other civilians. And I know they killed my nephew at the Battle of Procyon, Professor Cross replied calmly. But hatred, justified or not, makes for poor science. If you want to succeed in my class, you'll need to approach alien life with curiosity rather than vengeance. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of other students, their voices filling the previously quiet dining hall. Zara recognized several faces from her dormitory, including Rebecca, who shot her a knowing look before joining a table of well-dressed students from the core. Worlds. Professor Cross's xenobiology lecture took place in an amphitheater-style classroom with holographic displays capable of rendering three-dimensional alien anatomies in stunning detail. Zara arrived early and selected a seat in the middle section, close enough to see clearly but not so prominent as to draw unnecessary attention. The other students filed in gradually, their conversations a mix of excitement and nervousness about their first university-level science course. Many appeared to be traditionally aged college students, though Zara noticed several older individuals who might have been returning to education after other careers. Welcome to Advanced Xenobiology, Professor Cross began, her voice carrying clearly through the amphitheater's acoustic enhancement. Over the next semester, we will study the biological diversity of non-human sentient species, with particular emphasis on understanding, rather than exploiting their unique characteristics. The first holographic display materialized above the lecture platform. A detailed anatomical model of a Vorthon soldier. Zara's enhanced reflexes kicked in automatically, her body tensing for combat before her rational mind reasserted control. Around her, other students leaned forward with academic interest, but for Zara, the sight triggered vivid memories of battlefields and burning ships. The Vorthon physiology represents one of the most successful adaptations to high-gravity environments in known space, Professor Cross continued. Their dense bone structure and redundant organ systems allow them to survive injuries that would prove fatal to most species, including humans. A student near the front raised her hand. Professor, is it true that they can't feel pain the way we do? An excellent question, and one that highlights the danger of anthropomorphic assumptions. Vorthon neural pathways process nociceptive stimuli differently than humans. But this doesn't mean they experience less suffering. In fact, their psychological responses to trauma may be more severe than ours. Zara found herself thinking about the Vorthon soldier she had killed in hand-to-hand combat during the evacuation of Research Station Alpha. She had always assumed the creature's death throes were merely involuntary muscle spasms. But now she wondered if there had been something more, something she had been too focused on survival to recognize. The war has provided us with unprecedented data on Vorthon biology, Professor Cross said, manipulating the hologram to highlight various organ systems. Unfortunately, most of this data comes from autopsy reports and battlefield observations. What we lack is any significant understanding of their culture, their motivations, or their individual psychology. Another student, this one male and sporting the kind of expensive genetic modifications popular among the wealthy, spoke without raising his hand. Does it matter? They tried to commit genocide against humanity. Understanding them seems like a waste of resources. Professor Cross fixed him with a steady gaze. Mr. Hawthorne, I presume you're referring to the Luna colony attack. Tell me, do you believe every human soldier who participated in the retaliatory bombardment of the Vorthan industrial world Kethmore was individually responsible for genocide? The student shifted uncomfortably. That's different. We were defending ourselves. Was the destruction of their civilian population centers defensive? Were the 300 million Kethmorian civilians who died in our plasma bombardment legitimate military targets? A heavy silence fell over the classroom. Zara felt the weight of Professor Cross's words, remembering her own reaction when news of the Kethmore bombardment had reached the front lines. She had cheered along with the rest of her unit, seeing it as justified retribution for Luna Colony. Now, sitting in this classroom among young civilians, the memory felt different. The point, Professor Cross continued, is that war creates a context where individual moral agency becomes subsumed by larger political and military imperatives. If we want to understand any species, we must look beyond their actions during wartime to their fundamental nature. The lecture continued with detailed examinations of Vorthan respiratory systems, their unique approach to reproduction, and their complex social hierarchies. Zara took notes meticulously, her enhanced memory recording every detail while her tactical training automatically identified potential weaknesses in their physiology. When class ended, students began filing out in small groups, their conversations animated by the provocative ideas Professor Cross had presented. Zara was packing her tablet when she noticed Rebecca approaching with 2 other students. "So," Rebecca said, her voice loud enough for others to hear, "what did our resident expert think of today's lecture? Any corrections to offer based on your practical experience?" The other students slowed their exit, clearly interested in Zara's response. She could feel their attention like a physical weight, could hear their whispered conversations about the veteran student who had actually fought in the war. "Professor Cross is right," Zara said quietly. "We don't understand them at all." "Really?" Rebecca pressed. "Because from where I sat during the war, understanding seemed pretty straightforward. They attacked us, we defended ourselves. End of story." "Where exactly did you sit during the war?" Zara asked, her enhanced hearing detecting the subtle stress markers in Rebecca's voice that suggested she was performing for her audience rather than expressing genuine curiosity. Rebecca's face flushed slightly. "My family managed emergency supply logistics for the outer colonies. We did our part. I'm sure you did." Zara shouldered her bag and moved toward the exit, but Rebecca stepped into her path. "You know what I think?" Rebecca said, her voice taking on a harder edge. "I think some people get addicted to being special, to being the dangerous one in the room. Maybe university is too tame for someone who's used to solving problems with violence." The comment hit closer to home than Zara cared to admit. There was a part of her that missed the clarity of combat, the simple binary of threat and response that had defined her existence for 3 years. In war, her purpose had been clear: protect humanity, destroy the enemy, survive another day. "Maybe you're right," Zara said simply, then walked past Rebecca and out of the classroom. As she made her way across campus toward her next class, Zara realized that Professor Cross had been incorrect about one thing. University wouldn't be too tame for her. It was going to be a completely different kind of battlefield, one where the weapons were words and social dynamics rather than plasma rifles and explosives. And unlike the war against the Vorthans, this was a battle she wasn't sure she knew how to win. 2 weeks into the semester, Zara had established a routine that kept her mostly invisible among the general student population. She attended lectures, completed assignments with mechanical precision, and spent her free time in the library's rarely visited xenobiology archives. The ancient text repositories contained pre-war research on alien species, information gathered during humanity's brief period of peaceful contact, before everything had gone wrong. Her enhanced cognitive processing made the academic work almost trivially easy. While other students struggled with complex molecular diagrams and multidimensional chemical formulas, Zara's modified neural pathways allowed her to absorb and synthesize information at superhuman speeds. What took her classmates hours of study she could master in minutes. This advantage, however, was becoming a liability. "Miss Chen," Professor Cross called during their weekly seminar. "Perhaps you could explain the significance of silicon-based neural pathways in Andromedan physiology?" Zara looked up from her notes where she had been sketching tactical deployment patterns out of habit. Around the seminar table, 20 other students waited expectantly, most of them still struggling with the basic concepts she had mastered during the first week. The silicon substrate allows for much faster signal propagation than carbon-based neurons, Zara replied automatically. It also provides natural resistance to electromagnetic interference, which explains why human neural disruptors were largely ineffective against Andromedan forces during the Battle of... She stopped herself, realizing she had been about to reference classified military intelligence. Several students exchanged glances, and she could practically feel Rebecca's smug satisfaction from across the table. Interesting perspective, Professor Cross said carefully, though I was looking for a more fundamental understanding of how silicon pathways influence cognitive processing and social behavior. Right, Zara said, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. Of course. After the seminar ended, she lingered to speak with Professor Cross while the other students filed out. Rebecca paused at the door, clearly hoping to overhear the conversation. But a sharp look from the professor sent her on her way. You're struggling with the transition, Professor Cross observed, settling back into her chair. It's not the academic content, obviously. You're processing information faster than students who've been studying this material for years. Then what's the problem? Zara asked. You're approaching every question like it's a military briefing. You want facts, tactical advantages, actionable intelligence. But science, real science, is about understanding for its own sake. Professor Cross pulled up a holographic display showing various alien neural structures. Tell me, what do you see when you look at this? Zara studied the display, her enhanced pattern recognition immediately cataloging vulnerabilities and tactical considerations. Pressure points where a blade could sever major neural clusters. The Andromedan consciousness appears to be distributed across multiple nodes, so you'd need to destroy at least 60% of the network to cause complete cognitive shutdown. Professor Cross was quiet for a long moment. And if you weren't thinking about how to kill them? The question caught Zara off guard. She forced herself to look at the neural diagram again, this time trying to suppress her tactical conditioning. Gradually, other details emerged. The elegant mathematical symmetry of the neural architecture, the beautiful complexity of information flowing through crystalline pathways, the sheer alien magnificence of a consciousness so unlike human thought. It's beautiful, she said softly, surprising herself. Yes, Professor Cross smiled. It is. That's what I need you to remember, Zara. These aren't enemies to be defeated. They're wonders to be understood. The conversation was interrupted by a sharp knock on the office door. Professor Cross called for whoever it was to enter, and Zara was surprised to see Dean Morrison, a stern-looking man she recognized from the university's welcome orientation. Professor Cross, Miss Chen, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we need to discuss a situation that's developed. The dean's expression was grave. Miss Chen, have you posted anything on social media about your military service? I don't use social media, Zara replied, confused. What's this about? Dean Morrison activated his personal tablet, projecting a holographic newsfeed into the office space. The headline made Zara's stomach drop. War hero or war criminal? Decorated veteran enrolls at Terra University. The article featured a photo of her from her military service, along with heavily redacted excerpts from her service record. Someone had leaked details about her involvement in several classified operations, painting them in the most controversial light possible. According to this piece, the dean continued, you were responsible for the destruction of a Vorthon civilian transport during the siege of Kepler Station. The article claims 300 non-combatants were killed. Zara felt the familiar tightness in her chest that accompanied memories of that day. The transport had been broadcasting civilian identification codes, but intelligence had indicated it was actually carrying military supplies and reinforcements. She had been ordered to destroy it, and she had followed those orders. Later investigation had revealed that the intelligence was wrong. That information is classified, Zara said quietly. How did they get it? We're investigating, but that's not our immediate concern, Dean Morrison replied. The story is spreading rapidly through student social networks. There's already talk of protests, demands that you be removed from campus. Professor Cross leaned forward. Who published this article? A freelance journalist named Marcus Webb. He specializes in what he calls accountability reporting on military actions during the war. The dean paused. Miss Chen, I need to ask directly, did you knowingly target civilians during your military service? The question hung in the air like a physical weight. Zara thought about all the split-second decisions, the fog of war, the impossible choices that combat had forced upon her. She thought about the Vorthan transport, its hull cracking under the impact of her missiles, the knowledge that came too late about the innocent beings inside. I followed my orders, she said finally. Every action I took was authorized by my commanding officers based on the intelligence available at the time. That's not what I asked, the dean pressed. Zara met his gaze steadily. I killed enemy combatants and destroyed military targets. If civilians died as a result of those actions, it was not intentional, but it was war. People die in war, including people who don't deserve to. Dean Morrison nodded slowly. Miss Chen, I want you to know that the university stands behind your right to education as a veteran. However, given the sensitivity of this situation, we think it might be best if you took a temporary leave of absence until the media attention dies down. No. The word came out sharper than Zara intended, her enhanced vocal cords giving it an almost mechanical precision. I'm not leaving. Miss Chen, please understand. I understand perfectly, Zara interrupted. Someone with access to classified military records leaked information to a journalist specifically to drive me away from here. Running would validate their tactics and ensure they use them against other veterans. Professor Cross spoke up. Zara, the campus environment could become quite hostile. We're already receiving communications from student groups organizing demonstrations. Let them demonstrate, Zara replied. I've faced worse things than angry college students. Even as she said it, though, she wondered if that was true. Enemy soldiers had been straightforward threats she could identify and neutralize. But this was different. This was a war fought with leaked documents and social media campaigns, where the battlefield was public opinion, and she didn't understand the rules of engagement. Later that afternoon, Zara returned to her dormitory to find Rebecca waiting in the common area, with several other students she didn't recognize. Their conversation stopped abruptly when she entered, and she could feel their eyes tracking her movement across the room. Zara, Rebecca said, her voice carrying false sweetness. We saw the news. How exciting that you're becoming famous. Not by choice, Zara replied, heading toward her alcove. Of course not, one of Rebecca's friends chimed in, a young man with the soft features of someone who had never missed a meal. It must be so hard being held accountable for your actions. Zara stopped and turned slowly. Her enhanced reflexes had already cataloged the positions of everyone in the room, identified potential weapons, calculated response times. The tactical assessment was automatic, involuntary, and completely inappropriate for the situation. You want to discuss accountability? Zara asked quietly. Fine. I killed enemy soldiers who were trying to kill me and my unit. I destroyed military targets based on intelligence provided by my superiors. I followed lawful orders in defense of humanity during an existential war. She stepped closer to Rebecca's friend, noting how he unconsciously leaned away from her. What exa? Did you do during the war? Where were you when the Vorthans were bombing Luna Colony? What actions are you accountable for? I was 17, the young man stammered. I was in school. So was I when the war started, Zara replied. The difference is that when my family was murdered, I did something about it instead of hiding behind other people's sacrifices. The room fell silent. Rebecca's confident smirk had faded, replaced by something that might have been uncertainty or fear. Zara realized that her enhanced physiology had unconsciously shifted into a combat-ready stance, her body language broadcasting threat in ways she hadn't intended. She forced herself to relax, to appear more human and less like the weapon she had been trained to become. I'm going to continue my studies here, she said calmly. If that bothers you, you're welcome to transfer to another university. That evening, as Zara tried to focus on her xenobiology homework, she could hear her roommates whispering in the common area. They thought they were being quiet, but her enhanced hearing picked up every word of their nervous speculation about living with a trained killer. She stared at the assignment on her tablet, a comparative analysis of respiratory systems across 5 different alien species. The academic exercise felt absurd in the context of everything else happening around her. While she tried to understand alien biology for peaceful purposes, The campus was filling with students who saw her as a monster. Maybe Rebecca was right. Maybe she was addicted to being dangerous to be in. The protests began at dawn on Thursday morning, 3 days after the news article had broken. Zara watched from her dormitory window as students gathered in the central plaza, their signs and chanted slogans clearly visible even from the 47th floor. No war criminals on campus and justice for Vorthan victims were among the more printable messages. Her enhanced hearing could pick up fragments of the crowd's conversations, individual voices rising above the general noise. Some students seemed genuinely outraged by the leaked information about her military service. Others appeared to be participating more for the social experience than any deep conviction. A few, she noticed, were arguing against the protests, though they were clearly outnumbered. "Quite a turnout," Rebecca said, joining her at the window. "I heard they're planning to march to the administration building and demand your expulsion." Zara didn't respond. She was counting the protesters, estimating their organization level, noting the presence of campus security officers positioned around the plaza's perimeter. Old habits from crowd control training during the war. "You know," Rebecca continued, "you could just transfer somewhere else. There are plenty of universities that would probably welcome a veteran, military academies, technical schools, places where people might understand your background better. Is that what you want?" Zara asked, still watching the crowd below. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. "I want to feel safe in my own dormitory." "Is that unreasonable?" Zara turned to look at her roommate. Rebecca's hostility had been consistent since move-in day, but now there was something else in her expression. Actual fear, not just social posturing. "What exactly do you think I'm going to do to you?" Zara asked. "I don't know," Rebecca admitted. "That's the problem. You're this walking collection of weapons and enhancements and combat programming. How am I supposed to know what might trigger you? What happens if you have a flashback during finals week? What if someone accidentally startles you in the middle of the night?" The questions were fair, Zara realized. She had been so focused on trying to fit in that she hadn't considered how her presence might genuinely affect her civilian roommates. Her modifications were designed for warfare, not dormitory life. Her reflexes were calibrated for survival against enemies trying to kill her, not for navigating disagreements with teenagers worried about their grades. "The enhancements have safety protocols," Zara explained. "They're designed to prevent harm to friendlies. I can't hurt you accidentally, even if I wanted to. But you could hurt me if you decided to," Rebecca pressed. Zara considered lying, offering some comforting reassurance that would be technically accurate, but fundamentally misleading. Instead, she chose honesty. "Yes," she said simply. "I could." The admission hung between them like a physical barrier. Rebecca stepped back unconsciously, and Zara felt something inside her chest tighten with familiar loneliness. An hour later, Zara made her way across campus toward her morning lecture, threading through crowds of students who alternately stared at her with curiosity, hostility, or nervous fascination. The protest had moved from the central plaza to the academic buildings, and she could see clusters of students distributing flyers and engaging in heated discussions about her presence on campus. "Hey," someone called out as she approached the science complex. "You're her, aren't you?" "The war criminal?" Zara turned to see a group of 5 students blocking her path. They appeared to be undergraduates, probably first or second year based on their age and the confident ignorance of their expressions. The one who had spoken was a tall young man with the kind of expensive genetic modifications that marked him as core world nobility. "I'm a student here," Zara replied evenly, trying to get to class. "Students don't usually have body counts," another member of the group said, a young woman with elaborately styled hair and clothing that probably cost more than most people's annual salaries. "How many Vorthons did you kill?" The question was clearly intended to provoke her, to create a confrontation that could be recorded and distributed through social media. Zara could see at least 3 personal recording devices pointed at her, their operators hoping to capture something dramatic. "I don't discuss my military service," Zara said, attempting to walk around the group. They moved to block her again. "Why not? Ashamed of what you did?" "Proud of it, I bet," the tall young man sneered. "Probably loved every minute of the killing." Something cold and familiar stirred in Zara's chest. During the war, comments like that would have preceded violence, would have required immediate and decisive response. Her enhanced physiology began flooding her system with combat stimulants, preparing her for engagement. She forced herself to breathe slowly, to remember where she was and who these people were. Students, not soldiers. Civilians who had never seen combat, never faced the impossible choices that war demanded. Their ignorance was frustrating, but it wasn't a threat requiring neutralization. "Move," she said quietly. "Or what?" the woman challenged. "You'll add us to your kill count?" Before Zara could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. "That's enough." Everyone turned to see Professor Cross approaching, her expression stern and her presence somehow managing to command immediate respect, despite her relatively small stature. "Miss Martinez." "Mr. Blackwood, Miss Vera," she addressed the students blocking Zara's path. "I believe you all have classes to attend." "Professor Cross," the tall young man said, his tone shifting to something more respectful but still defiant. "We're just trying to understand why the university is harboring someone with Miss Chen's background. Miss Chen is a registered student with every right to access campus facilities," Professor Cross replied firmly. "If you have concerns about university policy, I suggest you schedule appointments with the appropriate administrators rather than accosting fellow students in hallways." The group exchanged uncertain glances, their confident confrontation deflating under the professor's authoritative intervention. One by one they began to disperse, though not without several backward looks and muttered comments. "Thank you," Zara said once they were gone. "Don't thank me yet," Professor Cross replied grimly. "This is only going to get worse before it gets better. The administration is under significant pressure from various student groups, and there are rumors that some faculty members are planning to demand your removal from their classes." They walked together toward the science building, Zara's enhanced hearing detecting the whispered conversations that followed in their wake. She was becoming a celebrity of sorts, though not the kind she would have chosen. "Professor," Zara said carefully, "maybe everyone would be better off if I did withdraw from university." "Would you be better off?" Professor Cross asked. Zara considered the question. Going back to military service was an option. Her enhancements and combat experience would make her valuable in any number of security or law enforcement roles. She could return to a world where her nature was an asset rather than a liability, where people understood what she was and what she could do. "I don't know," she admitted. "Then you stay," Professor Cross said firmly. "Miss Chen, may I share something with you? I wasn't entirely honest when I said my nephew died at Procyon." Zara looked at her questioningly. "He didn't die there. He was captured by Vorthon forces and held for 14 months before being released in a prisoner exchange. When he came back, he was different. Enhanced. Mog the predator in a room full of prey. Maybe there was no place for someone like her in the peaceful world that other people's sacrifices had made possible. But she wasn't ready to give up yet. Tomorrow she would face whatever protests and demonstrations awaited her. She would sit through classes where other students whispered about her past. She would continue trying to transform herself from a weapon into something else, something better, even if she had no idea how to do it. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday evening, 3 weeks after the protests had begun. Zara was returning from the library when she found her dormitory room had been vandalized. Someone had used red paint to spray "murderer" across her sleeping alcove's wall, and her few personal belongings had been scattered across the floor. Her military decorations lay trampled and damaged. The holographic projector containing her parents' final messages smashed beyond repair. Rebecca stood in the common area with Maddie and Priya, their expressions mixing shock, guilt, and fear. It was clear from their body language that they had discovered the vandalism, but hadn't been responsible for it. "Zara," Maddie said hesitantly, "we found it like this when we got back from dinner. Security is on their way." Zara surveyed the damage with clinical detachment, her enhanced senses automatically cataloging evidence. The paint was still wet, applied within the last 2 hours. The intruder had used basic security bypass tools to access the room, probably student-grade equipment rather than professional gear. Most telling, they had specifically targeted her belongings while leaving her roommate's possessions untouched. "Did you see anyone unusual in the hallway?" Zara asked, kneeling to examine the broken projector that contained her last connection to her parents. "No," Rebecca replied quietly. Her usual hostility was absent, replaced by what appeared to be genuine sympathy. "I'm sorry about your things." Campus security arrived within minutes, led by Officer Martinez, a middle-aged veteran who carried himself with the bearing of former military. He surveyed the damage with professional efficiency before turning to Zara. "Miss Chen, I know this is difficult, but I need to ask if you have any idea who might have done this." Zara almost laughed. The list of suspects would include a significant percentage of the student body, along with various faculty members and possibly some staff who had been influenced by the ongoing media coverage of her presence on campus. "It could be anyone," she said simply. Officer Martinez nodded grimly. "Unfortunately, you're probably right. The campus has been on edge since the protests started. We've had 17 separate incidents of harassment or vandalism targeting various students over the past month." 17? Priya asked, clearly shocked. "The protests have created an atmosphere where some people feel justified in taking extreme actions," Martinez explained. "Miss Chen's situation has become a focal point, but the problems go deeper than any individual case." After security left and the immediate excitement died down, Zara found herself alone with her damaged belongings. The room's cleaning systems had removed most of the paint, but the smell lingered, along with the psychological impact of having her personal space violated. She was attempting to salvage data from the broken projector when Rebecca approached cautiously. "Zara, I wanted to apologize." "For what?" "For how I've treated you since you got here." Rebecca sat down on the common area couch, her expression unusually serious. "I've been thinking about what happened today, and I realized I've been part of the problem." Zara looked up from the damaged device. "How so?" "I've been treating you like some kind of dangerous animal instead of a person, making jokes about your background, encouraging other people to see you as a threat." Rebecca paused, clearly struggling with the admission. "I think I was scared, and I dealt with that fear by trying to make you into something less than human." The honesty was unexpected. Zara had grown accustomed to Rebecca's hostility, had factored it into her daily routine as just another obstacle to navigate. This sudden vulnerability was somehow more unsettling than open antagonism. "Why were you scared?" Zara asked. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. "During the war, my older brother was stationed at Titan Defense Platform. He was there when the Vorthan fleet broke through the outer perimeter." Zara remembered that battle. The Titan platform had held for 6 hours against overwhelming odds, buying time for civilian evacuations from the inner system. The final transmission from the station had been a simple message: "Tell them we held the line." "He didn't make it," Rebecca continued. "His transport was destroyed during the evacuation. For 3 years I lived with the fear that everyone I cared about might be taken away by something completely beyond my control." "I'm sorry," Zara said softly. "When you showed up here, you represented all of that. The war, the fear, the reminder that the universe is a dangerous place where terrible things happen to good people." Rebecca looked directly at Zara. "I wanted you gone because having you here made it impossible to pretend that everything was safe now." Zara understood the feeling. She had joined the military partly to gain some sense of control over the chaos that had destroyed her family. The illusion that action could prevent tragedy, that being strong enough and fast enough and deadly enough could somehow make the universe fair. "The universe isn't safe," Zara said. "It never was. The war just made that impossible to ignore." "I know that now," Rebecca replied. "I also know that you didn't create that danger. You just responded to it." Their conversation was interrupted by Maddie rushing into the room, her face flushed with excitement and distress. "Zara, you need to see this," she said, activating the wall display with her tablet. "There's been a development in the news story about you." The display filled with a news broadcast featuring the journalist Marcus Webb, the man who had originally published the leaked information about Zara's military service. He appeared to be giving an interview from what looked like a professional studio setting. "Tonight, we have new information about the classified military records that were leaked regarding Terra University student Zara Chen," the news anchor was saying. "Mr. Webb, you've claimed that you received these documents from a whistleblower within the military. Is that still your position?" Webb looked uncomfortable, shifting in his chair before answering. "Recent investigations have revealed that the documents I received may not have come from a military source at all." "What does that mean exactly?" "It appears that the leak was orchestrated by a civilian organization with ties to several anti-war activist groups. They obtained the classified information through illegal hacking and specifically chose to release it in a way that would cause maximum disruption to Miss Chen's civilian reintegration. Zara felt something cold settle in her stomach. Turn up the volume. The news anchor continued the interview. Are you saying that Miss Chen was deliberately targeted? That appears to be the case, Webb admitted reluctantly. The organization responsible has been attempting to prevent various veterans from successfully transitioning to civilian life, apparently believing that making reintegration difficult will discourage future military recruitment. And you were unaware of this when you published the original story? Webb's discomfort was obvious now. I believed I was publishing legitimate whistleblower information about potential war crimes. I'm now aware that I was manipulated into participating in a harassment campaign against a private citizen. The broadcast continued with additional details about the investigation, but Zara stopped listening. The revelation that her harassment wasn't random, that someone had specifically targeted her as part of a larger political agenda, created a strange mix of vindication and anger. That's horrible, Priya said softly. They ruined your projector, your pictures of your parents, all for some political statement. More than that, Rebecca added, her voice carrying a new understanding. They've been manipulating all of us. The protests, the harassment, the fear, none of it was organic. It was all manufactured to drive you away. Zara stared at the display, thinking about the anonymous students who had confronted her, the faculty members who had quietly requested her removal from their classes, the countless whispered conversations about her presence on campus. How many of those reactions had been genuine, and how many had been shaped by deliberate misinformation? What are you going to do? Maddie asked. Zara was quiet for a long moment, considering her options. She could use this new information to defend herself, to reveal the manipulation that had been orchestrated against her. She could demand apologies from those who had participated in her harassment, or she could do something more productive. I'm going to finish my degree, she said finally, and I'm going to prove that whoever organized this campaign was wrong about what veterans are capable of accomplishing. The next morning, Zara made her way to Professor Cross's office, finding her advisor reviewing holographic displays of molecular structures with intense concentration. Professor, I'd like to propose an independent study project. Professor Cross looked up, clearly intrigued. What kind of project? I want to research Vorthon's social psychology and cultural anthropology. Not their military capabilities or tactical vulnerabilities, but their civilian society, their art, their family structures, their individual motivations. That's a fascinating proposal, but we have very limited primary sources for that kind of research. Most of our data on Vorthon society comes from military intelligence gathered during wartime. Zara had expected this objection. What if we could establish direct communication with Vorthon civilians? Academic exchange rather than military intelligence gathering? Professor Cross stared at her for a long moment. Miss Chen, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? The bureaucracy involved in establishing official contact with former enemy civilians turned out to be more complex than planning a military assault. Zara spent weeks navigating university committees, government oversight boards, and interstellar communication protocols. Each meeting required careful explanations of her motivations, detailed proposals for academic oversight, and repeated assurances that she wasn't planning to resume hostilities through academic channels. Professor Cross proved to be an invaluable ally in the process, leveraging her reputation and connections to open doors that would have remained closed to a student, even one with Zara's unusual background. Together, they crafted a research proposal that emphasized mutual understanding, cultural exchange, and the potential for preventing future conflicts through improved communication. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Kieran Voss, a xenolinguist who had worked on translation protocols during the brief pre-war diplomatic period, reached out after hearing about their project through academic networks. I've been waiting for someone to propose something like this, he explained during their first meeting in his cluttered office, filled with alien language samples and communication devices. The Vorthon Academic Collective has been attempting to establish civilian contact with human researchers for months, but they haven't found anyone willing to participate. Zara felt a spark of genuine excitement for the first time since arriving at university. They want to talk? More than talk. They want to collaborate. The war was as devastating for their civilian population as it was for ours, and they're trying to rebuild their society with a better understanding of human motivations and behavior. Dr. Voss activated a holographic display showing what appeared to be a formal communication in Vorthon script, the flowing symbols somehow beautiful despite their alien nature. This is a proposal from the Kethmore Rehabilitation University, one of their institutions established after the bombardment of their industrial world. They're requesting human participation in a joint research project studying cross-species conflict resolution. The irony wasn't lost on Zara. Kethmore was the world her own military forces had helped devastate in retaliation for the Luna colony attack. Millions of civilians had died in that bombardment, and now their survivors were reaching out to humanity seeking understanding rather than revenge. What would my role be? Zara asked. Initially, language and cultural exchange, learning to communicate effectively with Vorthon researchers, understanding their academic approaches, establishing trust. Dr. Voss paused meaningfully. Eventually, if the project succeeds, you would be among the first humans to visit a Vorthon world since the war ended. The possibilities were staggering, not just for her research, but for the broader implications of renewed peaceful contact between their species. The project could establish precedents for post-war cooperation, create frameworks for preventing future conflicts, maybe even honor the memory of those who had died by ensuring their sacrifices led to something constructive. But first, she had to survive the remainder of her first semester. The revelation about the organized harassment campaign had shifted campus dynamics significantly. Many students who had participated in protests or avoided her classes were now dealing with the uncomfortable realization that they had been manipulated. Some approached her with awkward apologies. Others simply began treating her with normal civilian indifference, and a few seemed to harbor even more resentment at having been deceived. Rebecca had become an unexpected ally, her guilt over her initial hostility translating into determined support for Zara's academic pursuits. She had even volunteered to help with research tasks, though Zara suspected this was as much about assuaging guilt as genuine interest in xenobiology. The most significant change came from Professor Cross's xenobiology course. Word of Zara's proposed research project had spread through academic networks, attracting attention from students and faculty across multiple disciplines. The weekly seminars now included graduate students from anthropology, psychology, and even political science, all interested in the implications of direct civilian contact with former enemies. Today we're going to discuss something that would have been purely theoretical until recently, Professor Cross announced during one particularly well-attended seminar. The psychological and social frameworks necessary for post-conflict reconciliation between species with fundamentally different cognitive architectures, she gestured to Zara. Miss Chen has been working on establishing communication protocols with Vorthon civilian researchers. Perhaps she could share some of her preliminary findings. Zara stood acutely aware of the dozen faces watching her with varying degrees of curiosity, skepticism, and interest. A year ago, she had been briefing military units on enemy vulnerabilities and tactical assessments. Now she was preparing to discuss peaceful cooperation with those same enemies. The first thing I've learned, she began carefully, is that Vorthon civilian academics approach knowledge very differently from their military caste. Where human researchers tend to focus on individual achievement and competitive advancement, Vorthon scholars appear to prioritize collective understanding and consensus building. A graduate student raised his hand. How does that affect their research methodologies? They conduct experiments in groups rather than individually, and they don't publish results until the entire research collective reaches agreement about interpretations and implications. Zara gestured to the holographic display showing sample communications from the Kethmore researchers. Their messages aren't structured like human academic papers. They're more like philosophical discussions seeking mutual understanding rather than assertions of discovered truth. Another student spoke up. That seems inefficient. How do they make progress if they have to reach consensus on everything? Different doesn't necessarily mean inefficient, Zara replied. Their approach might actually be more effective for certain types of research, particularly projects involving cross-cultural understanding or ethical implications. Professor Cross nodded approvingly. Miss Chen raises an important point about anthropomorphic assumptions. We tend to evaluate alien approaches based on human criteria for success, but that may not be appropriate. The discussion continued for the remainder of the class period, ranging across topics from communication theory to conflict resolution psychology. Zara found herself genuinely engaged with the academic exchange, contributing insights based on her unique perspective, while learning from her classmates' different approaches to the material. After class, a young woman Zara didn't recognize approached her hesitantly. "Miss Chen, I'm Sarah Kim, a graduate student in peace studies. I was wondering if you might be interested in collaboration on your Vorthon research project." "What kind of collaboration?" Zara asked. "I've been studying post-conflict reconciliation processes in human societies, particularly cases where former enemies successfully transitioned to peaceful coexistence. I think there might be applicable frameworks for interspecies cooperation." The suggestion intrigued Zara. Her research had focused primarily on communication and biological understanding, but the psychological and social aspects of reconciliation were equally important. "What would you contribute to the project?" Zara asked. Sarah seemed prepared for the question. "Theoretical frameworks for trust building, conflict transformation methodologies, and historical analysis of successful reconciliation processes. Also," she added with a slight smile, "I'm fluent in 3 human languages and have been studying Vorthon linguistic patterns for my dissertation." Over the following weeks, Sarah became a regular collaborator on the project, bringing academic rigor and theoretical frameworks that complemented Zara's practical experience and biological insights. Together, they began developing communication protocols that went beyond simple language translation to address the deeper cultural and psychological barriers to understanding. The work was challenging, but rewarding in ways that military service had never been. Instead of identifying weaknesses to exploit, Zara was learning to recognize strengths to appreciate. Instead of planning how to defeat enemies, she was discovering how to understand neighbors. The first direct communication session with Vorthon researchers was scheduled for the following month, a real-time holographic conference that would mark the first peaceful academic exchange between their species since before the war. Zara found herself both excited and nervous about the prospect, aware that her performance could influence the future of interspecies cooperation. But for the first time since arriving at university, she felt like she was pursuing something that justified the sacrifices that had brought her there, not just personal redemption or academic achievement, but a chance to transform the legacy of war into something that might prevent future conflicts. Late at night, as she reviewed Vorthon language patterns and cultural analysis, Zara sometimes thought about her parents and the millions of others who had died during the war. She couldn't bring them back, couldn't undo the destruction that had been wrought by both sides. But maybe if her research succeeded, she could ensure that their deaths contributed to understanding rather than continued hatred. Maybe that was worth surviving university for. The holographic communication chamber hummed with barely contained energy as technicians made final adjustments to the quantum relay systems. In 3 hours, Zara would participate in the first peaceful real-time conversation between human and Vorthon civilians since the war began. The weight of that responsibility sat on her shoulders like a familiar burden, reminiscent of pre-mission briefings when lives had hung in the balance of her decisions. "The translation matrix is as accurate as we can make it," Dr. Voss explained, gesturing to the complex array of linguistic processing equipment surrounding the communication platform. "But remember, language is only part of communication. Their social cues, their cultural assumptions, their entire framework for understanding reality might be fundamentally different from ours." Zara nodded, reviewing her notes one final time. Months of preparation had led to this moment, studying Vorthon cultural patterns, learning basic elements of their language, developing frameworks for academic cooperation that could survive the trauma of recent warfare. Sarah stood beside her, equally nervous but radiating excitement about the historical significance of the moment. "Are you ready for this?" Professor Cross asked, approaching with Dean Morrison and several other university officials who had gathered to observe the proceedings. "As ready as anyone can be for something that's never been attempted before," Zara replied. The irony of her situation wasn't lost on her. A year ago, she had been planning how to kill Vorthons more efficiently. Now she was preparing to invite them into academic collaboration. The same enhanced reflexes that had kept her alive in combat were now calibrated for recognizing social dynamics and cultural subtleties. "Incoming transmission detected," announced the communications technician, establishing quantum link with the Kethmore Rehabilitation University. The holographic projectors activated, filling the chamber with shimmering light that gradually resolved into the interior of what appeared to be a Vorthon academic facility. The architecture was unlike anything in human space, with flowing organic curves and surfaces that seemed to pulse gently with bioluminescent patterns. 3 Vorthon figures materialized on the platform, their forms alien but somehow graceful in their movements. Zara had seen Vorthons before, but only through weapon sights or tactical displays. Observing them in peaceful context revealed details her military training had never prioritized. The subtle variations in their carapace patterns that might indicate individual identity, the way their secondary arms gestured in what appeared to be supportive communication, the evident intelligence in their compound eyes. The lead figure, distinguished by elaborate bioluminescent markings around what Zara assumed was their head region, began to speak in flowing Vorthon syllables that the translation system converted to accented but understandable English. "Greetings to our human colleagues. I am Research Collective Coordinator Veshitai of the Kethmore Rehabilitation University. We extend gratitude for your willingness to pursue understanding across the barriers of recent conflict." Zara stepped forward, acutely aware that her words would be scrutinized by observers on both sides of the conversation for any hint of continued hostility or hidden agenda. "Coordinator Veshitai, I am Zara Chen, representing Terra University's Xenobiology Research Program. We are honored by your willingness to share knowledge with former enemies." The Vorthon's response carried what the translation system interpreted as emotional undertones, though Zara wasn't certain how accurately human concepts like emotion applied to alien psychology. "Former enemies, yes, but current seekers of wisdom. The devastation of our worlds and yours has created opportunities for growth that would not have existed during peaceful ignorance. We have learned much about human resilience and determination, though we admit our understanding remains limited." Sarah stepped forward. "Coordinator, I am Sarah Kim, studying frameworks for post-conflict reconciliation. We are particularly interested in how your society has approached rebuilding after the damage to Kethmore." The secondary Vorthon figures moved in what appeared to be a pattern of agreement or support before Veshitai responded. "The thermal storms that consumed our industrial centers forced us to reconsider fundamental assumptions about individual identity versus collective survival. What humans might term disaster became catalyst for philosophical evolution. Our research seeks to understand whether similar transformation occurred within human societies." The conversation continued for over 2 hours, ranging across topics from agricultural recovery methods to psychological trauma treatment to mathematical approaches to resource distribution. Zara found herself genuinely fascinated by the differences in how the two species approached identical problems, the way Vorthon collective decision-making contrasted with human individual initiative. Most remarkably, there were no references to military actions, tactical advantages, or strategic considerations. Both sides seemed committed to treating each other as fellow academics rather than former combatants, though the underlying awareness of their shared violent history added weight to every exchange. "We propose establishment of regular communication protocols," Veshitai announced as the session began to conclude. "Perhaps monthly exchanges focusing on specific research topics. We have particular interest in human approaches to individual psychological recovery from collective trauma." "We would welcome that arrangement," Professor Cross responded. "Our students could benefit greatly from understanding your collective approaches to knowledge synthesis." After the communication ended and the holographic projectors powered down, the chamber fell silent except for the quiet conversations of the various officials and researchers who had observed the historic exchange. "Well," Dean Morrison said finally, "I think it's safe to say that went better than our most optimistic projections." Zara felt an unexpected sense of accomplishment, different from anything she had experienced during military service. Instead of achieving victory over enemies, She had participated in building bridges between former adversaries. Instead of proving her superiority as a warrior, she had demonstrated her value as a mediator and researcher. "Zara," Professor Cross said, approaching as the chamber emptied, "I have something to tell you that you should know before you read it in tomorrow's news feeds." "What kind of something?" "The Interspecies Academic Council has formally requested that you serve as humanity's primary liaison for the Vorthon Research Exchange Program. It would mean spending next semester at Kethmore Rehabilitation University, living among Vorthon civilians and serving as a cultural bridge between our species." The magnitude of the opportunity was staggering. To be the first human to live peacefully on a Vorthon world, to study their society from within rather than from a distance, to help establish precedents for interspecies cooperation that could prevent future wars. "What would happen to my regular coursework?" Zara asked. "This would replace your regular coursework. You'd be earning credits through independent study while contributing to research that could reshape human-Vorthon relations for decades to come." Zara thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the military enhancement chambers where she had been transformed into a weapon, through the battlefields where she had fought for humanity's survival, to the university classroom, where she had learned to see former enemies as potential collaborators. "I'll do it," she said simply. 6 months later, Zara stood on the observation deck of the transport ship Academic Exchange, watching the blue-green sphere of Kethmore grow larger in the view screen. The world below showed obvious signs of the bombardment damage from the war, vast crater lakes where industrial cities had once stood, but also evidence of remarkable recovery efforts. Her reflection in the viewport showed changes that went beyond the physical healing of her combat scars. Her enhanced physiology remained, but its purpose had been transformed. The same reflexes that had once been calibrated for identifying targets now helped her recognize cultural nuances and social dynamics. The tactical analysis capabilities that had kept her alive in combat now assisted her in navigating complex academic and diplomatic situations. Rebecca had surprised everyone by volunteering to assist with the Earthside coordination of the exchange program. Her guilt over her initial hostility transformed into dedication to the project's success. Sarah would be joining Zara on Kethmore within a month, bringing additional research capabilities and theoretical frameworks for their expanding collaboration. Most importantly, Zara felt like she finally understood what Professor Cross had meant about approaching alien life with curiosity rather than vengeance. The universe was still dangerous, still capable of taking away everything someone cared about without warning or explanation. But it was also capable of beauty, wonder, and connections that transcended the boundaries of species and conflict. The transport shuddered slightly as it entered Kethmore's atmosphere, beginning its descent toward the university complex that would be Zara's home for the next year. Through her enhanced hearing, she could detect the nervous conversations of the diplomatic staff who were accompanying her, their voices mixing excitement with understandable apprehension about this unprecedented mission. But Zara felt calm, centered in a way she hadn't experienced since before the war began. She was still a weapon, still enhanced beyond normal human capabilities, still marked by the violence she had witnessed and participated in. But she was also something more now, a bridge between worlds, a translator of not just languages but entire ways of understanding existence. As the ship settled onto the landing platform and Zara prepared to become the first human to walk freely on a Vorthon world, she thought about her parents, about all the beings who had died during the war, about the infinite potential for both destruction and creation that sentient life represented. She couldn't bring back the dead or undo the damage that had been done, but she could ensure that their sacrifices contributed to understanding rather than continued hatred, to cooperation rather than endless conflict. The young woman who had survived war was ready to build peace.